understand that's the signature, and we think we can predict when it happens. So it turns out when that happens is when you've got no local storms, and you have a storm really far away that's produced a really big wave that travels great distance to get to our shore. Because when that happens, waves travel based on, wave speed is based is correlated to what parameter of a wave. There's a long period, in the ocean we call it period inverse of frequency, but basically a long period wave travels faster than a short period wave. So speed is directly correlated to a wave period, so it's inversely correlated to its frequency. So basically, if you have a storm over the Gulf of Alaska or off the Aleutians, it generates a bunch of waves, and when you get 3,000 or 4,000 miles away, you've sorted them out based on their wavelength, essentially. And so what we get is a bunch of waves that have almost exactly the same frequency, almost exactly same wavelength, and that's what produces that situation where they're coming in, they're almost the same, so when they get in phase, they create really big waves, but when they get out of phase, the destructive interference can last for quite a while and make the ocean look flat. So it's pretty basic, simple principle.
Troy?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the relationship of this behavior to a position in the tide cycle?
That's a great question. You know, actually, it's funny. I wish I brought my fatter talk tape too for this group because you guys are a little more sophisticated. Because, but let me get through this and hold that thought, and then we'll go after this. Yeah, because actually, you guys really are a little more techy than I should have thought of it. No, it's not. Here's an accelerated video. No, watch that log. So, am I in anybody's way? So, it basically the waves, and this is not, it's really hard to capture this on film. But you can see the waves aren't washing that far up, and they kind of once in a while seem to want to kind of go a little farther, And if that's the one that's sort of like, and then that one. So, and the scale is such it's kind of hard to tell, but that log is a pretty darn big log, and it's about this high. So what you just saw, if someone was anywhere near that log, they could have been slammed down and pulled back in by that wave, and then it goes quiet again. So. This kind of day is the day where the storm has come from far away. So I said the storm has to be far away to produce that signal on our beach. Now, if there's actually, let me go back to this for a second. If there's a storm closer by, what it can do is actually fill in this area with other big waves. So you could have this exact signature from a storm off the Gulf of Alaska hitting our beach. And if it was the only set of waves present, it would produce this signature. But if we also have a storm off our coast producing, say, 10-foot waves, what you'll get is other waves that fill in that period. And it changes the whole, changes the ability of the beach to trick people when that happens, because now there's constant waves breaking up really big, and so people naturally stay back. So this answers the question of, well, why is it that no one dies when the waves are 25 feet? When the waves are 25 feet, we generally have to have a storm much closer by, and it doesn't have this signature. What it has is 25-footers going wham every 10 seconds, wham, constantly through time, uniformly through time. So it doesn't have constructive and destructive, it just constantly throws waves at the beach. If you've ever gone to the coast during those big winter storms with the towering surf and the strong winds, you've probably looked at it and thought, I'm not getting anywhere near that, right? So what I believe happens on those kinds of days is that the natural warning ability of the waves is adequate to keep people back. There's nothing about the ocean that can fool people when it's like that. And when you get out of your car on that kind of day, you can hear the ocean first thing. As soon as you get a little closer, you might feel salt spray. When you get within eyesight, it looks like this terrifying, dangerous thing, and so people naturally stay back. So that's the basic theory that we're operating on. Getting back to this, so if there was a big storm, in addition to what I just described, the beach would look like the one I showed earlier and keep people back.
Troy?
Yeah.
My husband's mother owned beachfront property, and she lived there for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
She was extremely she was extremely surprised at the number of people who would just be driving along, and of course, and then they would take their cars and do a beach access and come down. I just parked their car there and just leave it if the waves were just like you said, the normal waves. And there was more than one time, in fact we were there once, and the car was then about halfway up, it was about halfway up in sand,
Yeah.
and they had to get the thing. What her observation was that people don't really see any danger in those waves.
Mm-hmm.
And they take their vehicles just right out there, and she just could never understand why.
Well, see, I think her and I came to the same conclusion. Her from many years of watching the ocean, that the people who drove their cars down there, you know, they just glance and make an assessment. They don't actually give it a thorough looking over. Now, there is a group that looks at the beach, the ocean, very carefully to watch for that signature I showed you, right? That set behavior. You know what group that is? Yeah. If you've ever been driving around the coast up there on Patrick's Point or around Trinidad or New Navy Base Road here, and you'll look at and you'll see a cluster of surfers standing around. And if you stop for a while and had a picnic, for example, you'd notice that they seem to stand around for a long time. And you might think, boy, those surfers are social people, like to stand around and chat, much like amateur radio people, right? But they're actually doing something very analytical. In fact, now I feel compelled to go back to this. I think I need to come back and give you guys a technical talk. What they're doing is they may get there at some point, and they want to wait through this entire 20-minute period to see this. Surfers call these sets. It turns out this same kind of day that I described as being the potentially most dangerous is also the best surfing day, because these waves tend to be really big and long period and beautiful. So if they get there right here, they know they have to wait until they see a set up on a bluff looking at the ocean to see where the breaks are going to be before they go in the water, because then they know where to go. If they went in the water right here, it would just be a crapshoot. So that's why surfers are watching it really carefully. Whereas the average beachgoer who drives their car down or just hops out to go visit the beach, they glance at it and that's it. So let's see. What was the question that you asked about tides?
Tides.
Yeah. The data also shows this really profound correlation between incidents and rising tides. It seems like rising tides get more people than falling tides. And I don't really know why. There's three potential, in my mind, there's three potential explanations. One is that higher tides present a different beach profile and therefore delivers the waves to where people are differently, perhaps with more force, you know, that kind of thing. There's certainly a potential that in that 20-minute window where someone could be fooled into thinking the ocean is not dangerous and they've decided their proximity to the water, now they're walking, that the tide is actually bringing the ocean closer to them. Very, very insidiously, but surprisingly rapidly. Because at the maximum point of the tide's change, which on the tide curve is right there at the inflection point, if you remember from your calculus days, right? It can be moving horizontally. It can actually, you can moving vertically, not naked to the eye. To the naked eye, you wouldn't see it. If you've ever been somewhere where it's really flat and a rising tide, you can see the water moving across. So horizontally, it can actually produce a pretty profound impact. So it could just be that they got to the beach, they discounted the hazard, they adjusted the distance to the water, and they started going for a walk. And meanwhile, the ocean is like very quietly getting closer and closer to their doorstep without them being aware. So it could be that. And the last one is that it could actually affect the property of the waves coming in. That it could actually exacerbate that set behavior. Those are the three that I can think of, but I'm open to suggestions because I really don't know how to explain that. But it definitely seems to be a very tight correlation. The things that we're trying to do, I put this in a weird order because for 15 years now I've been trying to educate people about the dangers of the beach, and the early messaging was don't turn your back on the surf because it seemed like people were caught off guard. I've learned now through more testimonials that people, these waves can be so fast and so insidious that you could actually be watching the ocean and still be caught off guard. So we're sort of evolving our messaging. But in addition, you know, to trying to come up with educational message, we're also working even more aggressively to get the word out. So, for example, you'll start to see a whole new suite of signs going up on all the beaches in this area, trying to educate people about sinker waves as well as rip currents and the importance of not getting cut off by tides, because sometimes if you go around a headland during low tide and you're on your way back, now the tide's up, you can't get around it, you have to get way closer to the water or even in the water to get around it, so that's really dangerous. So those two are things we've been doing forever. We are just now, you may have caught it in the media, believing that we can predict when those conditions are really profoundly evident in the wave signature. And so I think the first time we did was actually 2011. Sadly, we actually really thought the conditions were right. We got the word out, we put it out in the media, on our webpage, everything we could do. And that's the weekend that the young lady died, when one lived and one died at Dry Lagoon. So that's actually the weekend that we had, that was the first weekend we tried to actually forecast it. No one else has ever tried to forecast these for the beach, you know, in the nation. And we were just starting that, and now we're even getting more confidence that we have skill in trying to forecast that. Normally, if we forecast something like that, we try to issue like an advisory or an alert or something like, you know, we would tell you if there's going to be a flood warning, for example. We're not really sure how to manage this one. It's a little different. It's gonna be a probabilistic forecast, and categorical. So, for example, on the Gulf Coast states, they do rip current forecasts, and they'll say there's a high chance of rip currents today. So we're thinking we might do that. Like there's a low, moderate, high chance of sneaker waves, and so the message in general is, this is sort of our latest messaging. Choose your beach well. And this is what I'll leave you with as far as like what to share with your family members, especially if you have kids that go to the beach or grandkids. Choose your beach well. Stay away from steep beaches, especially if you have dogs or kids. Don't go anywhere near Big Lagoon Beach. Honestly, nowhere near the wave slope. If you're going to go to that spit, go on the bay side, or choose a different beach altogether. Those beaches are just really deadly. If you get anywhere near the water and that set behavior happens, you can get in trouble. And then to remember that even if the ocean looks quiet, big waves can strike without warning. That's like a really important thing to keep in mind. And then the other thing is, if you don't need to be next to the water's edge, don't be next to the water's edge. That's a little tough one to sell, but the premise is that if you're just going for a walk, around here, it's not San Diego. Walk farther back than you would if you were somewhere in a milder climate. Because you've got boots on, possibly a jacket. You really don't belong anywhere near the water's edge around here if you don't need to be there. So that's that point. Now, if you do need to be close, because obviously you can't stay far back if you're in a clam or agate hunt or perch fish, right? If you do, and I actually practice this, and I've got my 20-something-year-old nephews who do it, and I'll tell you that Y chromosome is hard to fight, okay? Because it took me 3 years to get them to wear life vests, but when you pick muscles on the jetties or go perch fishing, I'm a big fan of wearing life vests, because if you do get pulled in, you've got a fighting chance. I didn't really cover it. It's always a downer to cover it, but I'll cover it for you now. When you get pulled into the surf around here with boots on and clothes, you are not going to get out. There's 3 things conspiring to get you. First of all, it would be hard to swim in flat water with boots and a parka on, but you're in pounding surf, super strong complex rip currents that are not even survivable for the best swimmer who knows rip current behavior really well. Any one of these by themselves. And then there's cold water paralysis. In this water, you've got about 3 minutes before your arms and legs start to fail you, and you can't tread water because your blood is sent to the core organs to keep you from suffering from hypothermia. Hypothermia in this water takes 45 minutes. Cold water paralysis takes a minute or 2, 3 at most. So you're just not going to get out. So the only hope is that you've got a life vest on that'll keep your head above water to survive that cold water paralysis and get through the set, and maybe you can get back in. But and we actually do it now in my family. And honestly, I haven't got a whole lot of people to bite on that one, but I really believe in it. And don't turn your back on the ocean. Stay alert. And the latest one,
Don't go in the
yeah, it's taken us a while to kind of really get this. It's weird though. It seems like the sources of trouble come in pulses. Like we've had multiple incidents about this when we didn't have it for 10 years. But it's not just dogs. And this is the toughest one though. If you have a loved one that gets pulled in, don't go in after them either, which is very hard to sell. I don't know what I would personally do, but I can tell you that my analytical mind can tell you that if you go in, it's a very good chance you're going to get in trouble too. Now there's no one on the beach to direct rescuers to the victim number 1, right? And when the victim does, and now when the rescuers do go in, they've got 2 victims instead of 1. So if you can resist it, don't go in after a loved one. Stay on the beach, call for help, direct victims to the person, and don't go in after him. Sadly, many times in the case of the dogs get out, the rescuer dies. In the case of one person goes in the water, the other one follows. Often they both die, or the rescuer dies and the rescuee gets out on their own. So it's tough to put ourselves in that position, but if you can think analytically in that kind of moment, then don't go in. We've really hit schools over the years, and kids are always so nice. They write little notes and they draw pictures and stuff. So I seem to make an impression on this little kid. Wear a life vest. Maybe he will actually do so when he grows up. This guy though, I'm afraid I'm not sure he was really paying attention.
You like your wave.
Yeah, he actually was a pretty good artist. He liked the audio visual and the chair. So I don't know if anything got through. But now, I want me to talk about the tsunami test also. Before I'll do, I'll show you something really sort of like I find it to be really intriguing. Yeah.
When would you publish a study like this?
That's a good question. I was just been thinking about that because I need to get it published so that I can get peer reviewed and have the, so AMS might not be the right place for it because it's actually a weird topic. It's scientific, physical science, oceanography and meteorology, but it's really human behavior.
No, there's a huge behavioral
It's a mix. Yeah, the waves by themselves shouldn't be dangerous. It's because of how people make decisions and assess hazards. So it might be a behavioral science journal. I don't know yet. I find it really intriguing the mixing the two. So I'm going to cover tsunamis really quickly, but I can take questions now about this stuff, or go to tsunamis and then take questions, or whatever you want to do.
Well, the Journal of Environmental Health,
Yeah, there you go. Is that, yeah.
JEH.
Okay.
What about dry sand? Is dry sand any indicator, or do they?
That's a great question, because, you know, in the purest sense, what I suggested here would be that the dry sand would be a pretty good indicator, right? Because this would have wetted the sand. So if you got here and the sand is wet to a certain distance, you can say, okay, well, that's the maximum extent that happened from the previous big set. But I would err on the cautious side and be a little pretty far into the dry sand, because one thing we've noticed is that not all sets are created equal. So you can have the bigger set of the sets, and you don't know which one you just watched or just wetted the sand. And one of the testimonials was a park ranger and interpretive specialist for Redwood National Park, freshwater spit. They were on dry sand behind a log having a picnic in their uniforms, radio, gun, the whole 9 yards. And a wave washed over the log and drenched them both, ruined the radio, and the gun had to be cleaned. So, and they were surprisingly far up the dry sand. Now, so it's sort of an indication. You definitely don't want to be out. During one of these days, you'll be shocked how wet the sand is, how far up it is. And so you definitely don't want to be down there. But even the dry sand thing, if your attention is going to be diverted, I'd even put a little extra, like a freeboard on that, you know. Because the other thing is, notice I didn't use the term rogue wave. Rogue wave is actually an oceanographically defined term. It's a wave that's more than twice the significant wave height, and it's a true statistical anomaly, and they happen. So, and merchant marine long vessels are really impacted by really long wavelengths. So rogue waves that are really long and pretty big are the ones that can break ships in half. So here's my how I correlate rogue waves with sneaker waves. Sneaker waves happen way more often. And that's why I don't like to think of them as rogue waves, because rogues are so freakishly rare. But a rogue wave can be a sneaker wave. So the dry sand, that incident of those rangers getting hit, that could have been a true rogue wave. That could have been a true statistical anomaly, not just a big set among smaller waves. So I don't really know. But those testimonials get me nervous about the dry sand rule that we used to use. Yeah. That's a great question, though. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, on a tsunami event, how does that break up the normal wave pattern, or does that ride on top of the tsunami event?
The regular storm waves could ride on top of the tsunami event. In fact, it's funny you asked that. I'm going to show in a second. There's tide, there's tsunami, and there's regular waves. And interestingly, people often ask if our wave buoys out here can measure tsunamis, and the answer is no, because they're actually measuring the up and down. And a tsunami is a very gradual, uniform lift of the sea level out in deep water. So, but I'll show you that in a second. Yeah.
It's kind of related. Maybe not. While you're here, would you explain the difference between wind waves and swell?
That's so funny. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You may have noticed we dropped those from our forecast.
I haven't noticed.
Okay. Yeah, this office is pioneering something that so far we've got nothing but grief for. But a wind wave is a wave that's currently being acted upon by the wind. So waves in the ocean that are generated by wind are generated because the wind pushes on the water, creates a wave, and the wind keeps pushing and grows a bigger and bigger wave. As long as that process is still continuing, it's called a wind wave. And for the process to continue, essentially the wind speed has to be greater than the wave speed. So as long as, for example, the wave is blowing 30 knots and the wind is blowing 30 knots this way, and the wave is only traveling 20 knots, then the wind is traveling faster, and it actually acts on the water surface much like an airfoil of an airplane that creates lift. It creates lift on the backside, which pulls that waveform up and continues to grow. If that happened, right, so the wind is 30 miles an hour and the wave is traveling 20, sorry, I was mixing knots. Let's just stay with knots. 30 knots, wind is traveling 30 knots, wave is traveling 20 knots, same direction. Now let's say the wind drops to 15 knots. Now the wave is actually traveling faster than the wind. The moment that happens, it becomes a swell. So basically a swell is a wave that is no longer being created by wind and it's just traveling by itself. So if I was pushing a ball bearing on the floor, as long as I was pushing it, I'd be causing it to accelerate. That'd be the wind wave part. As soon as I let it go and it started rolling off by itself, that'd be a swell.
Why do you tell what was the difference? I mean, why distinguish between the two?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because that's what this office is, under my leadership, is trying to do, is stop using those terms. They're essentially, they came out of the 50s when, in fact, I have a book I show when I make a case for this. It's from 1956. It's in the Naval Handbook of Meteorology. And I like to show it because most of the book is dedicated to okay, are you ready? 1956, right? We didn't have satellites or atmospheric models like we do now. So most of the book is dedicated to figuring out where the storm is based on the waves you see at any point. So if you're on the beach and you all kind of know this, right? You see big waves at the beach, you know there was a storm somewhere that created it. Most of that Navy handbook is dedicated to looking at the wave height and period, and the direction back into where the storm is, because they had no idea where the storms were, because there weren't satellites or models, right? That's how old it is. Well, that's the era that wind, wave, and swell came from. That's the wind, wave, and swell tell you the life cycle of the waves, like where they're at in their birth, they're in the birth canal or out of the birth canal, whatever. What you really care about for mariners is how big is the wave, what direction is it coming from, and what's the interval between the waves. So that's actually what we put in our forecast here. It's been a harder sell than I expected because it's kind of a lot of numbers. So in the old days we'd say wind waves 5 feet, northwest swell 10 feet. But the reality is a 10-foot swell can be a really long period swell or a short period swell. They're very different waves. The word swell really doesn't tell you much. So we say seas northwest 5 feet at 6 seconds and southwest 6 feet at 15 seconds. We basically give you the direction, height, and interval of 2 waves if there's 2 waves or just 1 wave. So, but yeah. Any other questions about anything to do with waves? I love waves. So remember the signature, right? Check this out. This is the Japanese tsunami that struck Crescent City back in 2011. And it's so funny that you asked that question about waves and tsunami. So this is the total merogram of what happened, right? So up and down, right? And then okay, this is called the de-tided. This is the tsunami without the tides, because the blue line is basically the astronomical tides, the moon and the sun pulling the water. And then this is the tsunami signature. So this is just 2 potential waves that might be out there. The ocean waves are lost in the noise here, basically, in this case, because this is on the order of a couple of meters, and the wave height could have been a couple of meters, and so it's just sort of washed out. But for really big tsunamis, the ocean waves wouldn't make much of a difference, because the big distinguishing feature is that tsunamis have an extraordinarily long wavelength, many, many miles instead of many, many feet. And so it's almost like a tsunami is more like a river coming in, because these time intervals are actually pretty big. It's like a tide on steroids, comes in and goes back out, versus a little wave that breaks and comes in, breaks and comes out. So, but the reason why I want to show this is I want to point something out really intriguing about tsunami. This came from really far away, right? Now I said earlier that signature that I showed you, going back to this, happened because the waves came from far away. So it might be conceivable that tsunamis would have a similar signature, right? Something caused a wave to be formed off the coast of Japan. It was a lifting up of a continental,
That
plate.
only happens for a short period of time.
But it creates a bunch of waves. Like when you drop a pebble in the water, right, and you see waves radiating out, there's multiple waves. So conceivably, that thing actually lifted for 5 minutes. So it was like going, and it started to pour water off, and so there's actually a protracted source of wave generation. Right? So it's conceivable that there'd be multiple waves propagating across the ocean that they might sort out and produce this signature. And it turns out, if I give the punchline, I don't know if you know this, but 1964, the big one that hit Japan, Crescent City, do you know where most of the deaths came from?
People went down to look at it.
They went back down. You know why they went back down? Because they thought it was done.
The eye of the storm.
Yeah. And Chile, 2010, man, it starts to become a blur. I traveled down there with a team, and people went back down too soon. And in our event here in Japan in 2011, this event, we had 1 death on the Klamath River mouth. They were too close. That was during the event, right? They assessed it to be not dangerous when they went down there. So check this out. This is a blow-up of that whole section of this tsunami. This is the deep-tided part, right? Here's the wave heights. Look what they're doing. They're getting smaller and smaller and smaller until they seem like they're almost completely gone. And wham, a bigger wave. So this is not scientific. I don't have anything to support this. But our new messaging on tsunamis is don't be fooled by your eyes. You may think it's over, but don't go down for a long, long time, because tsunamis, I'm convinced now, also trick people. And it can look like it's calm for 15 minutes, half an hour, an hour, like the wave is over. Oh, in Crescent City in 2006, the first one that damaged the harbor crew went down there after the first wave to tie up all the docks. Then the biggest wave came like 40 minutes later and almost killed them all. They luckily just narrowly got off with their lives. So this is actually something that turns out I think tsunamis have as well. So the message really is just don't let a quiet water surface make you complacent on the coast. Maybe in San Diego, but definitely not around here. If it looks calm, that's the time to question it. If it looks really stormy and terrifying and you're staying way back, you're probably not going to make the mistake of being full. But if it looks calm, do a double take, question your assessment, watch it for a little while longer, or just make sure you stay farther back. So that's our primary message about this hazard. And share that with your grandkids and kids and family, and especially if you're at the beach, you see someone
People from out of town.
If you're at the beach and you see someone from out of town, I actually glance at the license plate numbers at the license plate often. If I see someone on the beach, I look down, it's like, oh, they're from Kansas. Like, hey,
To be serious, I think that is a majority of the problem, is that you can educate all the people you want here. But if somebody comes from
So,
Kansas to see
I
the
know.
Pacific
Now,
Ocean, they have nothing to know if they left it ready to
okay, excellent point. Does anyone have a counterpoint to that? Is there anything about locals that could actually make them more complacent? More complacent, or more cocky?
Think they know.
They actually think they know it, because I've intercepted both kinds, right? And the locals say, I grew up here, I know what I'm doing. You can statistically get away with this for for your whole life, frankly, right? It's a game of chances. You can make that mistake of assessing the hazard, getting too close, and then, whoa, here's a wave, and run back and be safe, And if you have that experience in your life, you're actually more vulnerable in some ways because you think you know it all. So, and guess what the stats say? 50-50, locals and, yeah, that's it. So, I think the out-of-towners get in trouble for a different reason than locals who get a little too cocky because they have so much knowledge. The young woman on Dry Lagoon Beach that died, I don't have my time, I should just stop right there. Okay, quickly. She was a surfer. She was from Reading, everybody thought, out of towner, right? Of course, they don't know what they're doing. She had been going to that, she was like in her mid-20s, had been going to that beach every summer her whole life with her family, and had surfed and scuba dived and snorkeled and ab dived. It was a total beach rat. And so she was actually checking the surf and trying to decide whether to go over the overland route or try to get around the rock, and a wave just shot out of nowhere, and they were chest deep and pulled into the ocean. So I was actually really startled to hear her testimonial that she was actually watching the ocean and just glanced away for a second and was suddenly chest deep, shoved up against the cliff. So it shook me to my core, because I've honestly always thought, well, I know waves, it's not going to happen to me. But hearing her testimony made me realize that I'm just as vulnerable as anybody, because I think, I'm not going to have my attention diverted. So that's all I have. Thank you very much. Any other questions on it?
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I didn't touch it.
That's my nephew and our neighbor from Humboldt. Thank you very much. Hey, this piece of paper reminded me. We have a tsunami warning communications test. Don't ask me next week about handouts. Don't know about it. I didn't know you. I think last time I came to the club meeting, there was like half of you were in there. So, yeah. Now you might notice that this is a different date than the one that was mentioned about the EOC test. This is the one that we tested.